you. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. Like Geeta mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we think about new products and strategy. And I will start with a couple of fun facts, which are not very fun, actually. So in general, on an average, over 90% of new ideas and products fail. Even big companies like Google and like Meta are sitting on a pile of failed products and features. And basically, how do we think going forward, we reduce the graveyard that we have of things that did not work out, right? So basically, my agenda of this small presentation is going to be to give you some of the key elements that you can use to increase your confidence in the strategy that you're building for your product. And before we dive into the whole starter pack itself, let's figure out, like, debunk a myth about what strategy is and what strategy isn't. To start with, let's talk about what strategy isn't. Goals and metrics, roadmaps, new features and products, budgets, mission. All of these things are basically elements that you want to achieve through your strategy or things that you use to build your strategy, get buy-in, and then communicate it further to the teams, your investors, and your customers, but not really the strategy itself. What strategy is? Bear with me, it's a long sentence, but just trying to encompass all of it in one. It's a complete set of high confidence, high impact bet based on what do you think is going to be the long-term evolution of the domain that you're working on, with significantly enough broad understanding of the macro factors that affect your product and business model? And do you think how you can readily communicate it that could be converted into executable action plans for your teams and everybody who is part of the process? The main goal of the bet or the strategy itself or the product itself depends on your organization's mission. Like we said, it's not the strategy mission, it's not a strategy, it's one of the elements for which you build the strategy. And how do we get to it? Like, how do we make sure that the problem that we're solving is something worth solving? First step, you clarify the problem itself. What do you think is the decision that this bet or strategy is going to be affecting? What is the definition of the thing itself that you're measuring? Is it measurable? And we'll get more into things about which are measurable or not. How exactly does this thing matter? How much do you know about it now? And even if you don't know about it much now, how do you estimate how uncertain about it you are right now? And at the end, what sort of additional information do you need that could actually help you improve your strategy? And not just the information, but what is the cost of information that you need to get? Because sometimes, maybe just with little information, there are some things that you can do faster and iterate, because the cost of getting that information in itself could be pretty high. And sometimes, maybe it's worth going that extra mile and collecting that information. So when you think of strategy itself, and when you're building your new feature or your new product, I would forcefully club it into 3 buckets, right? Either you're trying to discover a different business model, where you're asking questions like, hey, is there even a market potential? Is there growth happening in this business model? Can you achieve good unit economics, sustainable profitability? After that, the second bucket would be if you're evolving your existing business model. So how are you checking how can you expand your product market fit after you've already achieved product market fit in your core product? How can you prioritize your expansion effort when you're going either geographically or in different user segments or use cases? And then overall, how does your product evolve for all the stakeholders involved in that product itself? And the last one is more about optimization itself. For the current product that you have you figured out at what level does your growth start slowing down? And why would it start slowing down? What are those levers that are constraining your growth? And how can you tweak those levers to make sure that your growth doesn't slow down after a point in time? And at the end of it, you always try to look back and think of the information that you now have, and how can that information change the strategy that you're building. So going into now to the new product strategy pack itself, how do we think about improving confidence in that, right? So these are the 4 pillars, and this is the first big definition that I talked about what strategy really is. 4 parts of it. First of all, How do you build your internal domain expertise? Do you understand your customers? How do you understand what are the key KPIs that you want to measure? What is the value proposition, customer insights? Understanding relevant external market forces based on the business model and the area that you're in. There might be a lot of external forces that impact your business. Something like regulations, something like competition, something like macro environment like the unemployment rate or the crime rate that's happening in the country itself. All of these factors that you don't really control yourself, but something that could impact your business a lot should be taken in consideration. The third and the fourth part is more about taking your information that you have internally, the information that you have externally, and how do you connect those dots in a very creative and abstract manner to build this non-linear strategy, which boils down to exponential growth. So when you're thinking of a new product or a feature, you might ask yourself some questions like, why should I do it and why should I not? If you start with why itself, well, it gives you expanded market. Maybe you can go into a new market. You can target different customer segments. You can diversify your revenue stream. So it's not just one thing that brings you money, but there's another thing that also brings in more value. You can increase your retention of the customer base itself because now they think you have an increased value proposition perception, right? You can also streamline your bottom line costs in terms of synergies around customer acquisition, but not just that, you can also leverage your fixed costs. And last but not the least, you build a stronger brand. Why should you not do it? There's a bunch of reasons we also think that makes the whole thing way more complex because maybe your organization's current capability and structure doesn't comply all of that, loss of focus, and last but not the least, it has a lot of money that you need to invest upfront. If we are deciding that we are going to go further, what are the 4 things that we can think of as a part of the new product recipe? First of all, focus on hard value proposition. I'm sure some of you have come across this idea of hard value proposition versus soft value proposition. How do we differentiate between them? A hard value proposition is something that impacts your customer directly, and you can measure it, right? A soft value proposition is something which makes the customer happy and it's good to have, but not something that is super necessary. And a hard proposition is something that your customer is actually willing to pay you the money or the value that you're proposing for. High confidence, high ROI activities. Hard value proposition also drives user and account growth, retention, acquisition, referral. And at the end, how do you think of going into the market? If we boil it down all, it brings you down to first, you want to have a high return on investment and capital efficiency on the initiatives that you're taking, making sure that the market that you're going in itself is big enough, growing fast enough, and at the same time brings in profitability. Your product has differentiation, but also synergy with what you think your core values are, the amount of capital that you're thinking of investing, and how do you go to market, which includes the kind of customers, persona, the speed, and also the external factors. Also, do not forget about the market trends that are also ongoing. As you know, something like OpenAI is already changing the whole face of the landscape. How do you make sure you're competing and you're at the same speed that the industry is moving on? Shared economy is a trend, home entertainment, 15-minute cities. In general, the landscape and the business model that you're exploring, make sure you're not going in a tangential direction of where the industry is going. It's just going to be harder to fight against that. Okay, so let's say all of these things make sense and you do decide that you want to go further with the new product. How do you do it? You pick an adjacent vertical. If it's already that you have a core proposition, you have a core use case, you use an adjacent use case. Don't go something far beyond that the customers don't resonate your company with. Find a transformative business model. We'll get a bit more into the transformative business model. Find an inflection point. That is, what are the few things that tip your business growth curve upwards? And also think about second mover advantage, always thinking that, oh, you're the first company who's thinking of this very exciting new product. Could be great, but not always great, because maybe you have to educate the market, invest a lot in bringing awareness to the customer itself, and it could slow down your overall growth. When you come in second into the market, maybe you already have the proof of concept that an existing player has done, and you know this kind of works, and you can just incrementally improve on the things that they're doing. I'm not saying first mover advantage completely doesn't work, but it's something to be considered. Thinking about transformative business models, here's what we look at. Your market size in itself should be attractive. Making a very good product for a very small niche sector of the customers, especially if the bill size or the amount of value that they're willing to give you is not large enough, constricts you to a very limited space. Potential profitability, which means your unit economics, the simple math equation needs to work. High synergy, because it continuously improves your costs. Make sure you have competition and market intelligence, what's happening around you, and have some sort of pragmatic confidence, because a lot of things you might be doing, there is no existing data that somebody can just tell you this works out, and if this doesn't, somewhere you have to mix your data and your gut feel together. So this is a simple example from Bolt itself of how you would think of, new products and new verticals. So on the y-axis, what you see is the market attractiveness that we talked about before, market size, growth rate, margins. And on the x-axis, you think about the synergies or the capabilities that you yourself have to execute the strategy that you want to. And you would like to be closer to your core, something that is proven. And one by one, you expand your circle of how far you want to go from your core and build your adjacency. How do we plan to get to a vision as a company when you're thinking of new product? Are you questioning that, should I build a new product or should I optimize my existing product? How do I prioritize it? How do I drive value? And how do I, at the same time, preserve the quality that I'm offering to the customers? So when you're thinking of adding a new use case, new feature, a new product, or optimize your existing one, you might think of how much value does it add to my organization as a percentage of the whole? Does it actually improve my value proposition? Which one does better, right? Like your existing product improvement or the new one? Which increases high synergy? Which increases high synergy? Where do you have low and beatable competition? And which also has like a better transformative business model? Getting into a little bit of a math, simple one. How do you prioritize your incremental profit? You think of your incremental profit. What GMV here is gross merchandise value. For you, it could be sales revenue in the context, yeah? So how do you think your projected profit divided by the amount of effort in terms of resources, cost, material, licenses, et cetera, that you have to build, equals down to in terms of the months to payback. The X months to payback is something that you need to figure out what works best for your business, for your landscape. For example, something like a rental market would have a year cycle because people probably rent once a year, but something like a transaction or payment online would have multiple times a day or a kind of cycle. So how soon do you think the payback makes sense? And that depends on your business model itself. 3 focus areas to drive maximum value, and just trying to give an example here from Bolt. And if you think simply of a ride-hailing marketplace, how does it work? First of all, you verify the value proposition of the marketplace itself. Price, people care about coverage, that cars are available, and the quality of the cars and the drivers. How do the life cycle metrics work out for you, and you want to continuously improve them? Some of them written here, activation, retention, etc. And at the end of it, efficiency, 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 because you don't want to always be putting money at the top of the funnel. You want some of that money to come back, and how do you do it is you optimize your operations. And also think about how can you improve or add new features or products, either through build, buy, or partnering. Last part, preserving quality itself. How do you think of preserving quality? You think about putting your capacity in a very strategic manner. You put some of the capacity that you have in your engineering and product department for offense. You put some of the capacity for defense, for things that you never thought would come up, but suddenly are on your plate because of a fire. And then also some sort of a platform capacity that you think continuously improves your product and helps you scale it better. How to grow post-launch. Once you've launched all these products, you think about few questions. Something we also addressed in the beginning is, how does this product even grow? What are the points of leverage? At what point do I think it's going to slow down? How do we improve the constraints? How do we align all the individuals in our core team, the teams that are going to be executing it, and also the shareholders? And at the end, what info do you have right now that will change your strategy? Assessing performance in two ways. So a goal-setting framework of how you can see you're performing on the objectives and key results with some of the metrics that you've tracked, and how do you do efficient resource allocation for high impact and better return on investment. So an example from ride-hailing itself. How do you think? So there's a cluster of metrics. You could have like 30, 100, or like 200 metrics based on your business model. But how do you make sure you identify the ones which have the highest impact? Because if you're spending all your time in optimizing all those small ones as well, maybe it's not going to be needle moving. So if you think of different sides of your business models, what are the main metrics, and what initiatives do they really move, and what's basically you have to figure out what are your North Star metrics. Efficient resource allocation comes down to how do you think which part of your business adds the most value, if there is any sort of multiplier that you think, let's say, A brings you more projected profit than B, and at the same time, how many people do you need to put into this to get this return on investment? Okay, a quick case study. So how many of you have actually used Bolt Drive here? Okay, that's actually more than 50% of the people. That's great. So, like, just to think of how we thought about the same thing, right? Why not? How should we do it? What are the metrics? Why should we do it? It sounded like a very good opportunity. It's improved value proposition for the customer because you have more flexibility. It's cheaper than the other existing options that people use to go from point A to point B, including their own cars. And that it has synergies. It's very close to our core vertical, which is mobility. It reduces and helps us like leverage a lot of fixed costs, right? Why not? Well, it increases the organization's capacity. Cars are not for free. It is very capital intensive, and you need to have decent amount of people working on getting these cars on the roads, and also that there's a lot of risks. People could be drunk driving. There are fines for parking. People just leave the cars upside down with their wheels out, like vandalism, et cetera, right? So there's a bunch of reasons for why and why not as well. But we did decide to go further with it. We had an initial learning curve, but what I could say that we could achieve in a few months after launch is we came in as a third player. This is an Estonian market reference, not Latvia. I'm guessing Latvia has a bit more players. So we came in as third player. There was, in general, no paid marketing. And that kind of is part of the business model itself, right? Because the asset is out there. It's visible physically. So it's already bringing and creating awareness, so you don't have to do increasing amount of, a huge amount of paid marketing. We could reach high utilization because value proposition in general was really good. People who wanted to use ride-hailing in general sometimes had to go from point A to B, rebook another ride, go from B to C, and so on. But with the car sharing thing, you could literally just pick up the car. You could do all your chores from A to B to C to D and come back home E and drop it very flexibly. Also, at some point, we realized that we don't have enough cars for the people, and coverage matters because you don't want to walk more than probably 10 minutes to find a car. So that means to improve the value proposition, we had to increase coverage, add more cars, and launch a few more markets and see how it works out. Thank you.